Today, we had a math mentoring moment with a participant from our online workshop where we discussed challenges at the start of class for the last period of the day, where kids are wrangy, what are we to do? And she's also been working on sparking curiosity consistently to get kids engaged and keep them on task. And then finally, a big can of worms was opened when the conversation moved into assessment, evaluation, and the role of descriptive feedback.
None of it was planned, but all of that came out of the rich discussion with SarahJane Wells from Toronto in episode 7 of the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. Let's do this.
Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr. We are two math teachers who, together,
with you, the community of educators worldwide, want to build and deliver math lessons that spark engagement,
fuel learning,
and ignite teacher action. Welcome to episode number 7, Routines, Curiosity, and Assessment. A math mentoring moment with SarahJane Wells.
I am so ready. Let's go, Kyle. Let's dive in. Well, SarahJane, thank you for joining us here today. And we definitely want to hear about you and your experiences in the classroom. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, how long you've been teaching, where you teach, a little bit of your story?
Yeah, it's kind of a long and a windy one, but I'll make it relatively quick. So I started teaching right out of undergrad. I'm actually American, and so I graduated from University of Pennsylvania in 2003 with a degree in biology and an undergrad degree in anthropology. And then I joined a program called Teach for America in the States. And I taught in inner city Baltimore at Chinquapin Middle School, teaching grade 6 science for 2 years, and then moved up here to be in Canada with my partner, and couldn't work right away and did a bunch of volunteering sort of to see if I wanted to continue to work with, I know I wanted to make some sort of social change, but I wasn't entirely sure that I wanted to do it in education. Because while it was a 2-year concurrent program of which you have no teaching experience except for like a summer school thing, and then here you've got 5 classes of 35 kids in one of the neediest districts in the country, and you're doing your master's at the same time. So good luck to you. So it was really intense.
Wow, that's brave.
Yeah, well, it also like made me question a lot of my my biases and my own personal privilege set, because it was really tough, but there was also that at any point I could walk away, where the kids I was working with were stuck in that situation for better or for worse. And so it really made me realize for the first time how much power I had. And so that was really interesting and eye-opening, but I wasn't entirely sure after that I wanted to continue on that, on the education front. So I volunteered in a doctor's office, and I didn't really like that. And I volunteered in a high school. And while it was interesting, I realized that I really loved working with, I was very interested in the kids and less so like the biology content. And so then I volunteered at Nelson Mandela Park Public School, which is in Regent Park, which is an inner city area in Toronto. And I was volunteering at Pathways to Education in Regent Park, and eventually got into a classroom and was doing like reading groups on a volunteer basis, and then got hired there eventually as an LTO, doing like reading groups for grades 6, 7, 8, and then got a 4, 5 LTO and a grade 1, 2 LTO, and finally eventually got hired, and I started having a whole bunch of kids. And right now I teach 6, 7 language and math and 2 grade 7 math classes at Ledbury Park Elementary Middle School, which is an interesting place.
Nice. You know, something that really resonated with me was your realization of the privilege that that you had, and I wrote down, you saying this idea that like you could leave at any time, but the students couldn't leave that situation. And I think, that's that for me is one of the big, I think, aha moments in my career, as well as when, for a long time, I thought it was, students didn't want to try hard enough or whatever. And I think it might look different in the high school classroom. I know John would probably agree, by the time they get to high school, they typically put like this mask on of, I'm disengaged because I'm too cool. But under that mask, and maybe if we went back a few years, maybe down to, where you're teaching grade 6 or grade 7, maybe we would see more of what you're seeing, which is just this situation that a student might be in, and they may become embarrassed of it over time or whatever it might be, and then in high school we don't necessarily see it as clearly. It's not as transparent. So hats off to you for in the early stages of volunteering, for persevering and pushing through, and seeing that teaching kids is what it's all about. It's less about the content that we went to school for because we were passionate about it, and more about the students that are in front of us.
In my the first 2 years of teaching, there was one teacher, Mr. Taylor, who was also a first year teacher. And we went into our little new teachers seminar, and it's like, I really thought my passion for math would be all I needed for behavior management, and they just don't love it the way I do. This is crazy.
Yeah. And you're just banging your head against the wall.
Right.
For years, right.
The passion for math was not enough to teach the 35.
That's hilarious, because that's exactly what I thought. If I'm overly ecstatic about what I teach, then the kids will be too. And it wasn't exactly, for some kids it was.
Yeah.
But not the kids that I was teaching.
Yeah. And it's really difficult too. I'm sure you'd feel the same when, you put all this effort into a lesson that, to you seems logical, right? Like, it's very difficult for us to undo what we already know. Like, things in our brains are just automatic. We've known them for so long that it doesn't seem like it would be challenging for someone who's younger and may not have the same experiences as us. But, you put all this effort in. It's almost like it's very difficult, especially early on in my career. I found it difficult to detach the fact that a student wasn't engaged in my lesson and to not take it personally, right? Yeah. That it wasn't like a personal shot, that, the student really doesn't care about me. It's not that, it's not that me they're trying to disrespect. It's the fact that, they've got a lot of other things going on that they're likely thinking about. And it's probably not about math class or, what I'm trying to get across as a learning goal for that day.
Yes. We have our school is really diverse in grades 7 and 8, and very much less so in grades K to 6. So we have a very interesting struggle with a lot of different people coming in at different places. So there's a very big difference in socioeconomic background. There's a pocket of newcomers to Canada. There's students who have to travel further to get to school, who also happen to be the students who have lower socioeconomic advantages, and are often the students of color. And having all of those experiences existing in the same classroom, in which they don't really necessarily understand where the other people are coming from, and then sort of trying to get them to work together in a way that is somewhat authentic, takes a whole lot of time. And so creating a classroom culture in which there is a degree of safety to take risks and to be wrong and to make mistakes, and to try out something new takes a while to foster. And I have to remind myself when I'm stopping class to do some of that community building, that eventually it's not wasted time, that is going to help lead them into a place where they can be safe and they can grow intellectually, instead of being afraid and inhibited to try something and to reach outside their comfort zone.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's we, and it's only been the last few years where I think we've definitely realized that too. Like, there's so much more that needs to happen if you want your lessons to go well in your math class. Like, there's so much, but other things that need to be in place before that great learning can happen.
Yeah. Well, we're wondering, and you've done a great job of helping us sort of, get into your, teaching mind and to see some of the experiences you've had. I'm wondering, is there a memorable math moment that sticks out to you? And it could be maybe personally, like for you as a student, or maybe it's for you as a teacher. But a memorable math moment, since that we are all about making math moments that matter. So is there anything that comes to mind you wouldn't mind sharing?
a lot of my memorable moments overall in math and other tend to be relatively like negative in that, and that is what I hold on to.
That's no
That's okay,
problem.
too.
You know that
Yeah.
you probably heard ours, and
Yeah.
both of ours were somewhat negative. So we'd love to hear yours.
So in grade 9, I had a professor who had like sort of big bushy hair and glasses, and it was pretty early in our experience. We were sitting in rows and he was giving a lecture about something, and he said something that sort of sparked my curiosity, and so I was starting to work something out in my notebook. And then all of a sudden something like whizzed by my head, and I like looked up and he's standing in the front and had just thrown a marker at me. He's like, "That'll teach you to not pay attention in class." But I was like trying, but I just was the type of student who wasn't going to speak out. I was like, okay, so I guess I don't do that again.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because now at least you can laugh it off. But I mean, how many others, had a marker or or a chalk brush or whatever it was chucked at them that, maybe that was enough to sort of derail you from wanting to go down that path at all. When we ask that memorable math question, we get so many varied responses, but many tend to be sort of the one that sticks out for us personally, like for the person we're speaking with. Oftentimes it's like these negative emotions, and that's definitely something I think for us to always think about when we're in the classroom. And I don't see teachers chucking things at kids as much anymore, which is good. But sometimes it could be the way we say things to our students that can do just the same amount of damage, and oftentimes it's not even intentional, right? So it's just something for us to be aware of. So thank you so much for opening up and sharing that moment with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, and one of my childhood experiences that sort of sticks with me with math is that my mom is the computer programmer, retired now, but she had, and my dad was a nurse. And so growing up, there was a lot of sort of gender norms that were sort of placed, like they were reversed in our family. But when I would talk about my parents' careers, they would be like, "Oh, you mean your dad's a doctor?" And so, well, no, my dad is a nurse. Or they'd be like, "Your mom's a teacher, right?" And it's like, "No, she's the computer programmer analyst. So she's not a teacher." And she would be the one that would sit with me and help me with my math homework. And she came from a family of engineers. So her dad was a civil engineer, and her two younger brothers also went into engineering. And she would frequently say that if she had not been a girl, that she would have been more likely to go into engineering. But because she was very much a quiet pleaser type, she didn't pursue that, and it wasn't expected of her to pursue it. It was expected of her brothers to go into an engineering field, and that she went to a communication field, which she was terrible at and didn't like. And so like that also stuck with me in terms of that there wasn't this expectation that I was supposed to be good at something because of my gender, and that it's okay to step outside of the expectations that society puts on you intellectually because of that. And so even though like I had the marker chucking at your head experience at home, that was very like, she was very supportive of like, let's figure this out and let's work this out. And you can do it. And even if you don't want to, like, you're able to do this, even if you're not going to do this now, it's still a possibility later. Because she went back to college when I was little in preschool, and then got her degree and like started a second career. So I think that was also like influenced my interest in sort of exploring anything I wanted to do academically, and not feeling like I couldn't go into physics and chemistry and take those higher level courses I could do them because I could do them if I was interested in them. And so I appreciated that.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something for me. I think is I try to be as clear as possible when I'm working with teachers, in that, a lot of people think like, oh, you must want every student to go into university and take math or physics or science. And really, no, it's not about that at all. For me, it's about having every student know that they can do whatever they want if they put their mind to it, and if they want to actually do it. I'm totally fine with a student leaving high school and saying, math, I don't like love it, so I'm going to go do this other thing, but I can do it. Like you never hear kids say, history, I'm just not a history person. Like I can't do history.
but you do hear kids say that, like history, it's okay, but it's not, I don't find it super, super interesting. But like, so they're not saying I can't, they just say like, it's not what I want to do. And
Right.
I'm totally fine with that for students. I just want to get it away from this idea that like, I'm not a math person. I can't do math. My mom or dad wasn't good at math, or, like you're saying, the gender issue too with, typically girls aren't good or boys aren't good, or, whatever that stigma is. I'm just kind of getting beyond that and getting kids to really just have this clear path of options that they'd be able to choose based on, what kind of fuels their fire, right?
Yeah. Do you find a question about high school? Because I've only ever worked with high school students in a tutoring setting, but I know like having taught grade 6 and then also having taught grade 7, I noticed that there's the girls get much more quiet as a whole between grade 6 and grade 7. So in grade 6, conversations aren't necessarily dominated by one gender or another. And then in grade 7, the same girls who used to be very vocal will still do their work, but are a little bit more dampened in terms of how much they want to participate and say things out loud. And I sort of attribute that to a lot of factors at our personal school, including a whole bunch of other people coming in at that point and some like social awareness kicking in of being like, I'm not sure I want to talk in front of all these new people and other adolescents and things like that. And I was wondering if you notice patterns or trends that have to do with that going into the high school level as well.
I can say that for sure that in my classes, and especially in the applied level classes, that happens, that the boys will do way more of the out loud, outspoken questioning or participation, whereas the girls will, and this is not always the case. This is just like you said, like maybe a trend that we're noticing is that, most of them are very quiet. Will do all their work, or not, they'll do a lot of good work, a lot of quiet work, but not very outspoken work. And one thing that I think has helped in my classroom is asking them to stand up and go to the walls and work together with other people, and it gets them to talk in a smaller group. And I think before the bigger group, and I think that's helped a lot, is this kind of think, pair, share. We hear that term, think, pair, share, but it works great when you ask kids to voice ideas to each other, to have it validated, and then move to the big group. It gives permission that, hey, I was unsure about this for whatever reason or whatever issues I bring to the classroom. I'm not that person that wants to shout it out initially, but as soon as they share it with their partner, it gives them that validation that, that was okay. I can share that now with the big group. So I've had a lot more experience or a lot more engagement when I do that kind of activity, especially with the girls, versus just asking a question straight to the class the first time. A lot of the boys will, who are outspoken, there's lots of quiet boys too, but you definitely notice that in high school for sure.
Yeah. And SarahJane, you had me thinking here as John's talking, I'm picturing, or I'm wondering if, it has something to do with more of that, reaching, that puberty and adolescence and that sort of alpha male kind of thing going on where, the boys are sort of trying to like play with this dominance thing, and whether now there's more of a separation between some of those behaviors when you see the male sort of, John even mentioned this, like more outspoken, throwing out, kind of like random thoughts, and it's kind of a little more aggressive than the female students tend to be. So I'm wondering, the implications, especially if I'm in my high school classroom and the norms in my room aren't clear and aren't, taken care of, where there's certain things that are okay and certain things that are not, in order for this math community to grow. Whether that's going to sort of take a group of students, in this case, the gender groups, and, have one sort of having more of a say or maybe more of a dominance than the other. So it's something to definitely think about. And for those who might be listening to this, to kind of think about in their minds whether, that sort of dominance thing is going on, because sometimes it can happen without you even realizing it. You might just think it's the dynamic of the class,
but how much of that dynamic is actually influenced by, the things we are setting as a structure in our class and as a routine versus the actual mixture of the students. So, I've made a note of it here myself to definitely sort of keep that in mind when I'm in the classroom for sure.
We've been talking, about some struggles, and these are pretty big struggles that we all have in our classroom, and the socioeconomic struggles and gender struggles in our classroom. I'm wondering if you could share with us like a classroom kind of lesson struggle or another struggle that you have had or challenge you've experienced along your journey recently, or doesn't have to be recently, but something that's in your lessons that is challenging you. Can you maybe describe something like that in your classroom?
Sure. This is more, it has to do with classroom dynamic and how my vision of what a lesson could look like doesn't necessarily like turn into it. And that so I teach this, in essence, the same lesson with some modifications for the grade 6-7, but 3 times. So one to my homeroom class in the morning, and then again twice to 2 different classes in the afternoon. And the class that I have consistently last period always goes very differently. And so we had a brain break at the beginning of the class, and it kind of made some things relatively obvious, in which we were playing a silly video called Boots and Cats to do a dance before we sort of settled down and started our work, because they'd been doing a lot of quiet work in English beforehand. And so we started playing the song, and there were about 6 or 7 students that just went completely bananas, and everybody else in the class like sat very still. And so the personality dynamic that was present between having these like 7 individuals that were just really, really full of energy and just bouncing around, and the other members of the class that were just like completely still. And a lot of the time in this class, what happens when we're doing, when we start with a notice and wonder, or they have a minds-on activity, is that the students who tend to be very still just go ahead and do it. And the students who really are very energetic and moving around struggle to get started on any point, on anything. And I hadn't really realized that there was such a physical dynamic between the students who were kinesthetic and the students who were much more visual or auditory, until we did that one activity. And there are some sort of extreme versions of that in the class, in which even once we attempting to spark curiosity, depending on how well it works, and there's the majority of the body of students is able to get started. And then I have a couple that just aren't. And we've spoken with parents, I've had conferences with them, we've worked on other things, and they're just really not. And so with one kid, we're wondering, is there something about like writing things down? And another one, there's a lot of social emotional issues that are going into it. And so trying to manage how much I'm pulling these students, like continuing to try to pull the students into what the majority of the class is doing, and the amount of energy that's taking, which is not really meeting with success. How much am I differentiating a completely separate activity that they're able to access, and then figuring out how much I can like assess what they're doing because it's separate from what everyone else is doing. And often it could be in a separate space. How much am I creating a divide in the whole class because I'm allowing these students to be in a separate space and saying it's okay for them to be separate, instead of continually trying to draw them in, and looking at the amount of like personal energy in any one class that's spent on like pushing students learning forward or creating some sort of class cohesion versus like doing damage control with particular individuals, which doesn't seem to be helping them all that much either. It's just trying to set up this a space where as many people as possible can be achieving at wherever their level is, acknowledging their level is different and their social emotional needs are different, but feeling as though that it's not happening in a way in which the majority of people are moving forward at a good pace, I guess. So it's and in any given, like there's a couple things that I've worked with that have worked well, like having a student sort of run the minds on so that they are the person that is doing the writing down of information for the knows and wonders, or they are the one that's like running the computer program to get us thinking about functions and trying to figure out, is that something that's sustainable? How often can I incorporate this into our regular lesson to try to pull the sort of target students in, and what message is that sending to all the other students who are like able and willing to sit relatively quietly? And how much of a conversation do we have about that as a whole class? How much of it is other people's business or not?
Yeah. You bring up you bring up some really interesting challenges here, which I promise there's many others out there who are probably nodding and going, oh yes, picturing certain students in their classroom, I'm sure, in that last period. So you've got a lot of factors here. You've got the end of the day, which, let's be honest, right? These poor kids, I don't know if you've ever gone to a conference, but by the end of a conference day, I'm there and I'm just like, I'm spent and my brain is hurting. And oftentimes it's because of all the great learning I've done. But by that last session, it could be really difficult, no matter who's up there saying, whatever they want to say, in order to sort of get my mind focused. So, with that in mind, you had already mentioned the idea of a brain break to sort of start things off. It probably doesn't help that if they're doing a lot of sort of independent work in the previous class, and then they're coming to you and now they're, sort of sitting there for this last little stretch of the day. I love how it sounds like you're doing a lot of minds on with things like notice and wonder. And although, this may or may not be happening, I'm wondering if throughout that notice and wonder, if there's maybe something you can try is giving, like almost using your own timer, or maybe even having a timer for them, where when they have an opportunity to do the notice and wonder, we tend to have them do a rapid write independently. But maybe that wouldn't work in this particular case. Maybe you go straight to like turn to your neighbors, like just tell them anything and everything, like try to get all of that conversation going so that, those rambunctious students are sort of like not getting a platform for their own messaging and feeling like, they're dominating in the classroom, trying to get like a good buzz going, but then also having a good routine to bring them back. So it's kind of like, going through those norms and saying, okay, so like, I get it, telling them everything you just told us, that's working against the entire room, and kind of like acknowledging that, hey, this is totally fine. Like, you're a human being. Like, I want to work with you on this, but we've got to work together. And I'm wondering if like something that John and I tend to use when we're doing workshops with 100 teachers in a room is we do the 1, 2, 3 clap. And that is super helpful. It's like just that action of that one sound, it like brings everybody back. And it might not the first time, like, based on what we're hearing from the group that you're working with and the dynamics of that time of day. But to have this and to be able to kind of have this structure there where kids could talk loud and like get all their thoughts out, and then bringing it back with the 1, 2, 3 clap, letting a couple kids share, and then maybe even letting them go back at it, right? So if like, letting 3 kids share, you jot them down and you're trying to kind of bridge this conversation. You're walking around the room, getting into that conversation with the students so that it feels like a whole group discussion, despite the fact they're working with their elbow partners. Is that painting a picture that seems reasonable, or maybe you have some thoughts on that based on the current structure and how you lead a notice and wonder? What are you thinking?
I definitely think that seems reasonable and worth a try. And so especially because some of the difficulty is with written output with a few students, that instead of being like, hi, you just came from language in which you were doing lots of reading and writing, and now you're kind of spent with that, and here you are. If your partner is you're doing a lot of the talking with your partner, and your partner is doing a lot of the writing, then that'll probably lower their sort of discomfort threshold and keep their ability to stay engaged in what we're talking about and in the math. And working on how to doing the 1, 2, 3 clap of figuring out what is the thing that will work with them, or giving them a little ownership of what is the thing that's going to bring us all back together, so that you're acknowledging this is the thing, you're hearing it, then we can come back. And because that gets to be a little point of struggle of being I'm not really going to listen to you because you're the one that decided how to do this. But if we do this together, then we have this one little moment, and now we could you had your time, we've had our together time, and now let's have a mini discussion.
Yeah. That's a good adjustment of that. I think you've been doing a lot of learning the last few months, and we're wondering, is there some specifics, like what specifically have you incorporated in your classroom to address some of these struggles that we've had? Referencing some of that learning from the last few months.
A lot, the idea of sparking curiosity has really been like a big shift for me, and I've started spiraling more of my minds on. And like the other day, one of the kids was like, "This isn't like we're sort of like switching around topics quite a lot. Like today, we're looking at some perimeter and area, which actually did tie into the activity that we were going to continue to work on in patterning. We're just like jumping around from topic to topic." And I was like, "Oh, so okay. Like, how do you feel about that?" Like, "I like it. It's interesting." They're like, "We're not getting bored on any one thing." And then I asked a couple other kids, they're like, "Why do you think we might be just like switching around from topic to topic?" And they're like, "Because it's all connected, and so that we don't get bored." And
Awesome.
And somebody pulled out something else. I was like, yeah, that's great. So what you all said, out of your brains, not out of me telling you that. I've also started seeing mathematical opportunities in things in a way that I hadn't before. So I think sort of giving a little bit more creativity. So like looking at all the 3-part math tasks and has helped me to like open up the way I look at what the tasks are that we pull in. And so as opposed to going to a lot of resources and just sort of like taking those plans or those activities and putting them in the class, of understanding a little more of the student interest and pulling it in that way. So like we had this amazing series of lessons about the potato chip box, which I think was a Dan Meyer 3-act math task. I don't remember, or maybe it was Robert Kaplinsky.
Yeah, I think it might have been Robert.
Yeah.
John, what do you
Okay.
Robert. Yeah, I think that sounds more Robert, I think.
Okay. In which we brought in this Frito Lays box. And I sort of anticipated it being a 1 to 2 lesson that had to do with looking at application of fractions, but it turned to this like incredibly rich activity in which they were like applying like making estimates on graphs that we made using Google Forms to try to predict how many students in each of the classes had chosen a certain type of chips, and then like trying to use that to create the ideal boxes for each of the 3 different classes, and then comparing those 3 different classes. And there was discussion and whole class engagement in some of those activities that I hadn't seen in a really long time. And I think a fair amount of that was because there was this anticipation of, okay, so here's our pie chart, and here's this section, and we know some information about it, but we don't know all the information about it. And we're going to make predictions. And then when you put your mouse over the cursor, it's going to show us the actual number. And we're either going to be right or we're going to be wrong. And like I can say that every single child in that class was fully engaged in like doing that prediction activity, because also the data was generated from them and their classmates.
Right.
And there were some things that were really surprising about it, such as like one class loved ketchup chips and the other class wanted nothing to do with it.
Right. That would be my class.
No,
I like the ketchup chips.
There you go. And so I think some of the learning that has been pulled in has been how to find some more of those moments, and then embed some different tools and strategies as they are coming out with the students. There's another really amazing moment in which I believe we were using the Talia shirt, or it may not have actually been that one. I think maybe it was with waffles, but there was a student who was making a sort of a bar model with her partner. And she was doing it in such a way that I was like, oh, this is not going to work out for this kid. Like, there's a really easier way to do this. And like the teacher from 3 months ago would have been like, why don't you use this number or this multiple?
Stop doing that, silly. This is ridiculous. Yeah.
This is way easier. But I like stopped myself and was like, oh, why did you choose to do it this way? And she explained why she chose to do it that way. And it's like, okay, so I'll come back around and see how that's going. Then I went around, sort of like monitor other, and came back. And I know she'd like erased all the multiples she'd been counting by. And it's like, oh, so you changed that. And she's like, yeah, I realized it'd make more sense to count by this number. It's a much friendlier number. I was like, okay. So like that was such a clear moment of just withholding my own opinion or my own direction allowed her to find it.
Right.
And sort of the light in her eyes of being like, yeah, this makes so much more sense, wouldn't have happened if I just directed her at that moment.
Right. You know what? And you just said it. Like in my mind, I'm picturing like what would that be a memorable moment for the student if you did the 3 months ago or the 1 year ago or the whatever, the old self of like, no, let's do it this way. Would that actually be something that would be helpful for a student beyond that 1 second and that one moment? Or her coming to the realization herself by working through it and, running into that roadblock and having to really actually reflect about it instead of just sort of being told. And I did that nonstop for years. Like I was running around the class, going desk to desk, like basically teaching kids how to do it my way. And it wasn't working. Like I was, just going crazy. Now, also, I think there's something else we need to consider too, is that it's always a it depends scenario. Because if she's sitting there ready to cry because she has no idea, then obviously, we're stepping in. But, so that's what makes our job so difficult, is that like everything's it depends. And what I'm hearing based on, what you've just shared, which I thought was super helpful, we were thinking about like the beginning of this class, especially fourth period, but then you came to this, I feel like a bit of an epiphany about this idea of curiosity. And, if we're more intentional, and I say we, because I know myself, I still catch myself where sometimes I'm just like, that math geek in me is like, oh yeah, we're going to start the class like this and everything's going to be great because like math is so cool. And meanwhile, like there was no curiosity there at all. Like, I'm wondering if like the balance between like, if I can find that hook, that curiosity, that spark for everyone at the beginning of that fourth period class. And I've worked on my structures to make sure they have the opportunity to kind of get some of that energy going and help to like, instead of like shutting down the energy, similar to like not shutting down a student's strategy, like you just mentioned, instead of shutting down the energy, is like helping them divert that energy into the goal, which is like solving this problem. Because now I'm just curious, like I can't help but think about it. And that's like the power of curiosity, we believe anyway.
I agree. And to some degree also, we had a staff meeting, which you're talking about the learning loop and like explicit learning goals and success criteria and descriptive feedback, and using that to fuel our learning. And your ideas on curiosity, and not necessarily being like, today our learning goal is I will use linear relationships and to graph this certain pattern in real life examples. And telling students that upfront at the start of the lesson, in essence, can many times squash the curiosity, because you're like, that's the strategy that we're trying to direct you to use.
Right.
And figuring out in my brain a little bit of, well, either how to rationalize this with my principal when he comes in and says, where's your stated learning goal? Being like, here is the learning goal. The children are discovering this as they go. And so right now, the learning, like, and I have our mathematical processes from Ontario, like I have all of those learning goals stated on the wall. So I'm like, at any point, I'm always directing them to be like, all right, so at this point, you are thinking about how you are thinking or plan because this one isn't working. So now you're going to go back to try a different strategy or find a more effective tool. And sort of directing the big things that are happening, it framed in terms of those mathematical processes, with the specific learning goals being evident more so by the end of the period or by the end of that like chunk of lesson. Because it's funny, at the very beginning you sort of asked, what do you want our students to, like, what do you want your students to remember? And at that point we've been working on a fractions unit, and so I was like, I want my students to know how to convert between an improper fraction and a mixed number, or what have you. And I was looking at everyone else as being like, just solve problems authentically. And I was like, oh yeah, actually that sounds like that. It makes way more sense. Like in reality, how often are they going to be using this? So it's trying to get them to solve problems. And I think that also opened my mind a little bit more to be like, right, so all of these specific expectations are helping to give them the tools to be able to solve bigger and more like authentic problems, and that is sort of where I want a lot of our focus to be, instead of like the minutia that makes up the pages of curriculum document, I
Very
suppose.
cool. So I'm wondering, like, as you kind of think ahead, what would be, I guess, the number one part of your math program? And that's like, this is big, right? Because this is like your whole math teaching. What is it that you're sort of like, what's on your mind right now that you're looking to, I guess, kind of work on refining, or, you know, maybe improving, or, you know, just sort of developing? So what's that sort of itch that you're looking to scratch over the next little while that you want to continue diving deeper on?
Assessment and evaluation. Like, especially because that is like, I'm bought in all of the, like, the student experience in terms of like the sparking curiosity and driving their understanding. And I can work that really well because I'm working that with my students all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so my struggle then becomes more of, like, I can speak to where they are, and I could tell you pretty accurately where all of my students are based on observations and based on seeing where their work is. And I struggle with the physical check of, like, here is this piece of work that you've turned in, here I'm applying, like, here is the level that you would of a 1 to 4, and I'm going to be giving you time to give that physical feedback and give it back to you, and also giving them that physical level based on the grade 7 or the grade 6 standard. Because for some kids, that's fine. Kids are constantly asking for what their mark is, and I'm hesitant to give it to them as long as they're like, so what was my mark on this? When I was like, well, you really understood it very well. And it's like, and my mark is, like, that is the point at which your learning stops. And I don't want to give you that mark, because then you're like, and I'm finished. And other kids, I'm like, you're very yet. You're not quite there yet. Like, you're at a concrete stage. You're not able to yet move along to the point in which you're expected to in grade 7. But I don't want to, like, this one is also going to be wildly discouraging. And so but at some point you're going to get it, because you're going to get your report card that has a number on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so wanting to figure out that balance between being disingenuous and not providing some of that information along the way, but doing it in a way that's not discouraging of either persistence or of continued learning for students on either end of the spectrum.
That's that, you know, the assessment and evaluation is definitely a challenge for everyone. And I love how you're reflecting on the effect of, you know, feedback, and then feedback with a mark, because, you know, a lot of the research is suggesting that, you know, if you put them together, the feedback's not really all that helpful. But something I heard you say earlier, which I think is a great place for you to kind of like play in the land of assessment, would be this idea, the aha that some of your students had, which was like, wow, we're really like mixing in these ideas. And it sounds like, whether intentionally or not, and I know through the online workshop, you have had access to our 6th module around igniting your next move. And in there we talk about assessment as well as spiraling, and why we put those together is because they really help each other out. Even though, like, eventually a student is going to get this like midterm, or this, you know, in elementary, get that term 1 report card, and it's going to have a number, because that's what we are told we have to do. But if I'm a student, and if I know in my classroom that, you know, my teacher intentionally is mixing things up as we go, not only to, you know, help keep me engaged, but also because you want to see and you want to provide them with multiple opportunities to engage in an idea. And then also in doing so, that my level of understanding will improve over time, which means that my actual evaluatory, you know, that number that actually gets stuck on my report card will change. I think that's something that it takes a long time for students to gain that, you know, realization. Even when you say it explicitly, it's like they're just so used to like a number getting smacked, you know, labeled right on their forehead. And, you know, as through time, if they see that the work they're putting in and in the opportunities you're giving them is actually going to help translate into understanding, which also translates into that actual mark, that grade that I put, actually changing because it reflects what I know today and not what I knew 3 months ago when we did, X, Y, or Z. Then, that culture, you can see students kind of like actually believing that growth mindset message instead of just sort of it being something that's written all over the school walls, right? You're not there yet, but then oftentimes we're like, but the test said this 2 months ago, so too bad, so it really helps to promote that message. And I feel like you're in a great position to kind of play in that space. So I love that that's sort of what you're thinking of kind of, working towards in your own professional journey.
It is indeed. And John, I think it's like you're the organizer that had the different learning goals and sort of like the bar in which you color in like 1, 2, 3 to 4, depending on where students are now, and that they can sort of, instead, I think I was reading one of your posts that was talking about having for a while that students would write down the number, and then you switched it over to having them color the bars because it just like sort of trumps over. Like once you get the 2 no longer matters because you've moved yourself up to the 3.
Right.
And is that sort of the model that you use right now for helping to record your students?
That's a good question. I'm right now using a tool called FreshGrade. It's built on an assessment routine that Kyle and I have been working on for the last few years, and it's kind of an extension of that, in the sense that what Kyle talked about, and in saying like that culture of establishing that because I give you a mark now doesn't mean that that mark is staying there. And for me, for a long time, it meant that like I wouldn't change those marks in my mark book, but now it's everything's always in flux. Like it's a snap; those marks are a snapshot of where we are now. And I still only like what you say is that as soon as you give a mark to a kid on something, that learning stops, and I still agree with that. But I definitely make it a priority to discuss on day 1 and every week about if we get a mark, then it means this. It doesn't mean this. Mm-hmm. So it means that we're in flux. We're in constant growth, and that is a priority for us from the get-go all the way through. It's like a main focus of what we do in the room. It's all about serving, getting better, and where we are now, like not staying where we are and just getting better. So what I'm doing now is I use a tool called FreshGrade to kind of manage all that, and kids have portfolios in FreshGrade, and in those portfolios are those learning goals, and they can contribute evidence to show how they've progressed on those learning goals. And so they'll take a picture of some work on our assessment kind of portfolio day to show off how they did on, say, like solving problems with the Pythagorean theorem, mm-hmm. or solving linear equations. They will say, Mr. Orr, look, and they take. I've solved this question, solved these problems. I've shown that work, or they can also contribute to that. Well, as we do activities throughout the day, every week, we do a lot of work on whiteboards, and it's also been a great way to take a picture of the work that would normally get erased, mm-hmm. never have a copy of it, and they put it in their learning goal according to what they did. And I really like the fact that they have to decide where this goes in our portfolio, because it's all kind of foldered off. And those folders just contain, it's a visual folder. It just contains pictures of work and comments about how they've done on that work. So I really like that they get to choose where that learning goal fits. And it makes them think about the learning goals that we're working on all year and that growth. So it's kind of like what I was doing in the past by having them fill in bubbles up to a certain level, and then me also contributing to those. So it's the same kind of thing. A FreshGrade allows you to give them whatever, show whatever kind of bubbles you'd like, or colors, whatever you like. In my grade 9 class, I have colors. So it's so they're not equating the color with a grade. Like you could put 1 star through 4 stars, but soon they realize that 4 stars means level 4. And so I want them to to think more about like where they progress from meeting or approaching expectations to exceeding expectations. So yeah, it's definitely a work in progress for me, and it's always something that we're kind of always building towards. But like you said, I think withholding that grade as long as you can is better for them in the long run. But when you give it to them, as long as they understand that the main focus of what we do all year is growth, and then it doesn't matter anymore when they get a mark.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
A logistical question about using FreshGrade. Does every student have access to a device to sort of take pictures to be able to upload there? So how does that technologically get managed in your class?
Sure. So right now our grades 9 and 10 are 1-to-1.
Okay.
In our board, and so they have a device. Now, does that mean in my grade 9 and 10 applied class that they bring their device every day? Because they take them home and or they're dead when they come in. So no, I have a bank of 10 that I always have in my room. But what happens most of the time now, those grade 10 students have their own phones. So it works on any device, whether it's a phone or whether it's an iPad we use the camera taking devices. Like I don't bring in the Chromebooks to do this because I want them to take pictures of their work, and it's hard to like take your laptop and turn it upside down and take a picture of your desk.
Totally possible.
Or the whiteboard, or it's possible, for sure, but it's tough. So yeah, a lot of that capturing is done with their own devices or with the shared devices I have in the room that they can just access the portfolio quickly.
And John, I just want to add into like another strategy that you might consider is, maybe picking like a day of the week where you can, sign out if, let's say there is a cart of devices in your school, and you sort of, it might not be the same day every week. Like maybe it's on the schedule. Like kids know, like, all right, Monday morning, it's like, okay, we managed to get the cart on Thursday this week. So the devices will be in the room. So like throughout the week, I want you thinking and planning for when those devices are here, which pieces of your work do you want to submit to me as evidence of your learning, of new learning, of current learning, like where, anything that we're just starting new is sort of this idea, like getting kids thinking like more like diagnostic. Here's my starting point. This is what I came with. And you had referenced earlier, I even drew a big line with arrows showing this kids are at so many different places that first time that we're tackling an idea, we want that to be like, this is where you're at today, but we don't want that to be where you are next week. And we definitely don't want that to be where you are at the end of June when we finish up the school year. So getting them in this habit of, as we're doing the work, John had mentioned, everything matters. And not because of the grade. That's the mentality we have to get kids away from, is the grade is to help you, or at least it was initially, used to kind of help you gauge where you are comparatively to where you were. But we've sort of created this educational, society of students that are, competitive and, comparing to different students. And that's not really what it's useful for. It should be useful for me being like, hey, here's where I was at the beginning, which is either, where I had hoped I would be at the beginning, or maybe it's not, but I want to help make that move up over time. And that, just that process of students sort of, maybe they have folders that, throughout the week they can like, oh, this is something I want to make sure that I put into my FreshGrade, and I can fire that in this folder. And for a teacher who's at home listening going, you know what, like I'm not techie, I don't even want it, maybe it's just now they hand in the folder and it's like, they've got to be selective, right? You don't want everything. Like I don't want to be the one sorting through everything. I want you to decide, what's the work that you want me to look at this week? Maybe I set limits on that. You don't want 20 pieces of work coming in from every student. So what are the, is it 2 things every week, or, 1 thing every week that you want to submit to me, because it's going to actually help me better understand what you know. And that will force them to go back and look at, where am I at, and where do I want to, like this 1 thing that I'm going to submit to Miss, where is it that I want to improve the most? Do I want it to be this thing that I'm already doing really well with? Do I want to improve that? Or is it this one over here that
I was really struggling with. And I want that to change because I know that I know more than what that number or that piece of feedback is telling me. So there's so many different ways, and we could be really flexible, whether it's with tech or without tech, but finding something that will help build that culture of improvement and that growth mindset, that productive disposition that, these grades are not here to label, but more or less help push the learning forward.
Mm-hmm. How much physical feedback in terms of descriptive feedback that is written for students to have do you use in your class? I realize that it's going to be highly variable depending on the day, the moment, the time, and a lot of other things.
Sure.
I find one of the constraints I'm working against, I think everyone is to some degree, is time.
Mm-hmm.
In that, like, when I'm there with my students, I am working with them like constantly, pretty much the whole. And so a lot of that feedback is verbal, and sometimes I'll have them write, or I'll write a sticky and we'll give it to them that way. But for some students, and myself included, then that sort of goes into the ether and they may apply it, but might not fully be able to recall it the next time they're working on a similar type thing. How do you manage the actual providing of descriptive feedback within like the frame of your week and the amount of time that you have in the class and out of the class to do that with them on their work?
Yeah, I regularly have one day scheduled a week to we call portfolio days, which are days for them to add to those portfolios. And so during those days, that's when a lot of verbal feedback is happening. And also during those days, I give them an assessment on the week's work. And it could be past, 2 weeks, last 2 weeks work or weeks work. And for me, that takes the form of a very kind of traditional looking quiz.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that when you get that quiz back, it is only written feedback on it. And so those questions look very textbooky like type questions, or questions that we've done for practice in the past, or even EQAO like questions for our grade 9 kids. And when they get that back, my comments are just written comments on how to improve. Like, what is the next step for you if you didn't get this question perfectly correct, or definitely like a short comment for me. You're right. Like, there's time. We have to just manage that time, because if I choose to do that, I am choosing to do not do something else. So. I write a short little comment on what a next step might be. Yeah. And I do not put a number on there as I say, like, hey, you've got a level 3. I don't do that. On that question, I give them the next step. And I think what is super important is the follow up to that is what do you do? Like, what does your classroom look like after you give that back? Because there was years where I handed quizzes back or tests back, and then that was it. And it was like they went back in the binder, whether there was a mark on it or not. And the kids did nothing
garbage.
about it. Yeah, or garbage, like on the recycle bin, right? How many quizzes have you found in there? It's in my class. This is going to sound funny. Like, I don't say this to the kids. I say this to the teachers in our district, or our district and our school. Is we've adopted a policy that we're trying to adjust the crap gap. If it comes in not so great, we hand it back with the feedback saying, let's fix it. Like, we're not accepting stuff that's like, that's it. We are always striving for the next thing, like, improve it now. So on those days, they get that feedback, and their job is to improve it and then hand it back in. And that's an ongoing process for them. So the timing for me is, after they write that quiz, I'm going to spend, half an hour to an hour of, probably more like a half an hour of my prep period, writing those feedback comments. And I only ask about 4 questions on these quizzes. So it's manageable, and it's in this week to week.
Mm-hmm.
I get a good sense of where they are written, and going into those quizzes too, because you've had so many interactions with your students, how they would do on those. So it's quite quick to write that feedback. But I think the important part is, like, what do you do next after you give them that feedback?
Yeah. And I wanted to also mention too, and John, writing feedback, obviously you want to make sure there is written feedback. But something to also think about, John mentioned about, when I do this, what am I saying no to? When I say yes to doing this, I'm saying no to something else. And my thinking is, when I'm giving feedback, So for example, it's Tuesday night. I'm at home, kids have gone to bed, and now I'm sitting down and I'm like, oh man, I got this stack of stuff in front of me. And, and I say am I because I know this was me for the longest time, where I would just start at the top and work my way through. And oftentimes I'd get to the bottom of that pile and be like, oh my gosh, we as a class are nowhere near where I was hoping we would be. So my wonder is, was it wiser for me to go through the pile just quickly first? Or is it before they hand it in? Am I using my time as they're doing some sort of assignment, assessment, walking around the room to kind of get a feel for like where kids are before I even look at this stuff? And is any of the feedback that I can give, can I give it verbally? Is it worthwhile? Are we at a stage where I could give you useful enough feedback in the written form? Or would it be helpful for me to give it verbally now and then do something about it? So like tonight at 8:00 when I go and, instead of marking that big stack and then being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, I just spent an hour or 2 hours or however long going through all this stuff and writing all this feedback. And we're not even anywhere close to where this feedback can actually be actionable for students.
Mm-hmm.
Could I have maybe used that time to think of what I'll do tomorrow about it? And maybe I give that feedback more individually for the students who, the 5 students who are at that place. So I think we overcommit on saying like, okay, I'm assessing this. So I'm going to like take this. And now I feel like committed that I have to, go through each and every single one, provide all this feedback and all of these things. And maybe it's not even worth that while yet, us thinking growth mindset. And maybe I use that time to, what's the activity I could do tomorrow that might drive home. Like if I can clearly see like a lot of these gaps are, connected, where a lot of the students are at the same place, or they just, the level of entry on this concept is very, very low. Maybe it just means that, this pile is going to go back and I'm going to give some individual feedback, verbally, and we're going to do a different activity tomorrow. And I maybe it's a more guided activity too. Like maybe there's a reason for me to do more guided in that particular case, or small group instruction based on the students who are struggling with similar concepts, and sort of taking that time and like kind of reinvesting it into the learning versus the feedbacking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience of starting to go through and then deciding to stop, because like I've looked through 10 of these and I realized that 7 out of 10 are struggling with this one thing. So we're going to work on that one thing. And the kids who don't need, like, who seem to have understood it through with like a brief flip through, this is your activity while we're going to be doing this other activity. Then we're going to revisit this assessment the following day, or like in a couple days, once we've spent some more time on this concept, that instead of being like, okay, no, not yet. But do you, when you're writing the descriptive feedback in terms of like for your individual, what do you write down for yourself as a teacher to sort of use as documentation of student learning? Like, so do you, would you be putting down like level 3, level 2 in your mark book? Or, because I know when I'm giving writing feedback for my language, there are times where I'll just like jot notes of being like working on conclusions or basic conventions of writing, so that I have a sense of, as I'm looking at their next piece, what I wanted them to be focusing on to push them further, so I can say, oh, yes, they did, or no, they didn't. That also takes a fair amount of time.
Yeah, yes, you're right. And I feel like for me, that's where my fresh grade portfolio really comes into play, because basically now in these visual folders, I have visual evidence of their learning, and it's organized chronologically. So I see a progression of where they are. So when I'm planning my lesson on solving proportions, what have we done so far up to that point on proportions? I can go right to that learning goal in my portfolio and see where these kids are and what their learning is. So kids can write down stuff on their learning, but I get to comment on that learning. I can also make notes to myself that I only see in there. So It does take a lot of time if you're going to comment on that learning goal, but I don't do a lot of that recording. I'm trying to work towards more of like, what is this kid doing so that I can be ready? Whereas I just flip to the visual and scan it and go, this is where this kid is right now. And it's a kind of an evidence for me so that I know right before we deliver that lesson how I'm going to push that student.
So when it comes time to write the fun progress reports or report cards or midterm reports or what have you, do you go into those portfolios, look over the body of work that they've done and said like, and based on my criteria, this is the number that you get?
Yeah. And I kind of have a blend because in the background of that portfolio, when I put a color on a kid's work, they know that there's a progression of color, but to help me with that number, to blend all of these learning goals together, because we have, in my portfolio, I have by the end of the course, probably 20 something learning goals, which turn into mostly they're just the most of the expectations. On the back end of that, I have kind of pegged numbers attached to those colors. So fresh grade can weight whatever you want to weight, and then it acts more like a mark book. So they don't see the marks, but they know their progression. I know their progression. So yeah, when it's time for report cards to come into play, I go to my fresh grade portfolio. I look over the body of evidence, and I'm like, yeah, I think. And then I look to the mark, and I go, do these line up? And if I do, then I use that mark, or I use a mark there. And if they don't, then I'm saying like, look at this visual stuff in my memory and my observations, and remember the conversations I had with my students that those don't line up. Then I feel like I use my professional judgment to give them the mark that I feel that is worth it, or feel that they've earned or not. I'm not saying earn, I'm just saying like this represents their learning. This is the number. And I'm confident that that is the number. I have all of my conversations in my memory that I'm using to help with that. I also have this visual portfolio of their progression on that learning to say like, this is where this number comes from. So I feel pretty confident when I decide on those numbers. But I do have that kind of pegged number based on the coloring of so they don't see it, but I can see it.
And how do parents, depending on their degree of intensity, and students sort of respond to that?
You can share. I've had nothing but glowing, talks with parents about this, because you can share with the parents by email those portfolios, so they see everything every time you add to it.
Right.
And I sent a letter home in advance saying this is what we're going to be doing. Do you have any questions? At parent teacher night, we definitely talk about those portfolios to say like, this is how this works. This is how they can get better. And when you tell a parent, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, that like your philosophy on assessment is about growth, and when you tell a parent that I'm only have your best, your kid's best interest in mind here about their growth, and you say like, all of these learning goals are always available for you to improve on 24 hours a day because you have access to it. They're like, oh, great.
I never knew that.
Really?
Like, Johnny, you didn't bring that note home.
So, like I have nothing but positive conversations with parents when you show them that portfolio to say like, look at you, this is your kid's learning on these learning goals. We're always working to make them better, and I'm giving them access to do that.
Yeah. And it's really difficult for parents as well to, I oftentimes, John hit it with the idea that like, oftentimes what ends up happening is the report card, it sort of like puts everyone against one another. It's like everyone's against the kid, and everyone's against the parent, and everyone's against the teacher. It's like everybody's not on the same wavelength. But when you have that conversation and a parent comes in and they sit down in front of you and they say, I disagree with this. And you're like, oh, awesome. Like, let's like, what do you just, yeah. What do you disagree with? Like, maybe like the fact is I'm human, and it's very possible that, especially in a scenario with you had mentioned you have a grade 6-7 with language and math, and you have 2 other grade 7 classes. Like, you've got like possibly 90-ish students. Maybe it's 120 if it's a different language and math group. It's very likely that this is not perfect. So if there's an area like my son or daughter knows how to work with Pythagorean theorem, like the geometric version and the algebraic version, and it's like, awesome. I can't wait for your son or daughter to show me that like tomorrow, or if they're with them, like now, it's like up to them. I can't wait for this to change. Like, it's not I put this down and now you're disagreeing with what I think. It's like, it's very likely that your son or daughter, and it's also very likely your son or daughter has improved since this was, put into the reporting system. So yeah, let's definitely work together to make sure that, we have a full understanding of what, your son or daughter is able to do currently and what their next steps are. So this conversation for me has been huge. I say it every single time to John. I feel like we get the most out of these conversations because we get to kind of, like throw out ideas and just really informally discuss them and sort of, push our thinking forward. So we're wondering, because this is, getting to be quite a long chat here. We're wondering, what is a big takeaway from this particular conversation for you? And, do you mind sharing that with the group? Is there anything you're taking away that you're going to be thinking about over the next little while?
My big takeaway right now is about this idea of a portfolio and how I can better incorporate that into my own classroom. And we have done a lot of work with the Google Suite. That's what our school board sort of endorses and uses. And so at this point in the school year, I'm reluctant to say, I'm going to adopt the look into Fresh Grade and do all of that pieces. But I know they have pretty good competency with using Google and using Google Drive and Slides, and that there's a lot of ways that I can help them to better document their learning using sort of shared folders as their portfolios, and using that as a communication and a documentation piece. I also really like the idea of like ways to spin the descriptive feedback by using that, like a weekly check-in, to sort of give them a place where they can sort of show what they know at this point, and for me to give them that like quick feedback to continue to incorporate in our learning loop. So I think those actionables and what I can do to help better provide feedback for them and document it for them, or have them document it for themselves, as well as have that for me to sort of look back on. I think it's been really helpful.
Awesome. It sounds like some good next steps for you, for sure. I'd be definitely interested to see how you manage those portfolios with Google. We also are a Google kind of school, and which means like we would love, I think, to check back in with you in a few months, just to see how that is going and how some of the other things that you're implementing in your classroom are going. We could definitely follow up in another conversation just like this to see how that's going. Would you like to do that?
I would love to. That'd be great.
Awesome. Well, you know what? We don't want to take too much more of a time, just a little bit more, but we do want to say thanks for joining us. We appreciate you jumping on here with us, and we look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Indeed. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great rest of the day, and we will be in touch with you soon.
Well, there you have it. Thanks to SarahJane for joining us today. I know we got a lot out of this conversation. We're looking forward to hearing back from her in a few months to see how she's coming along, implementing those new ideas into her classroom.
This was the second Math Mentoring Moment episode, with many more to come, where we'll have a conversation with a member of the Making Math Moments That Matter community like you, who is working through a challenge, and together we'll brainstorm ideas and next steps to help overcome it.
If you want to join us on the podcast for an upcoming Math Mentoring Moment episode where you can share a big math class struggle, you can apply over at makemathmoments.com/mentor.
As I'm sure you'd agree, there's a lot here to digest, but we did want to share this with you now so you can reflect on it and come back to us with some questions in the comments of the show notes page, on social media, or via email. We do a deep dive into these ideas during our Making Math Moments That Matter online workshop. So if you're interested in learning more about that, be sure to check it out at makingmathmoments.com/online workshop. Again, makingmathmoments.com/online workshop.
In order to ensure you don't miss out on new episodes as they come out each week, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform by simply searching, or use these quick links. For iTunes, go to makemathmoments.com/iTunes.
For Google Play, go to makemathmoments.com/play.
For Spotify, go to makemathmoments.com/Spotify.
And quick links will work for most other popular podcasting platforms as well. Also, if you're liking what you're hearing, please share the podcast with a colleague and help us reach a wider audience by leaving us a review on iTunes and tweeting us at MakeMathMoments on Twitter. Show notes and links to resources from this episode can be found at makemathmoments.com/episode 7. Again, that's makemathmoments.com/episode 7.
You can also find Make Math Moments on all social media platforms and seek out our free private Facebook group, recently named to Math Moment Makers, K-12. Don't miss our next episode.
If you're not interested in waiting till then, why not watch our 4-part video series to help build resilient problem solvers who don't want to stop learning math when the bell rings? You can find that free 4-part lesson series at makemathmoments.com/lesson 1, makemathmoments.com/lesson 1. Well, until next time, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And high fives for you.